you so much for inviting me in today. So yes, my name is Nicole. I'm with the National Institute for Human Resilience, and I'm here to continue our discussion about the GRIT Leadership Resilience Program for leaders in small businesses. GRIT stands for Greater Resiliency Intervention Teams. We developed this program as COVID-19 really started sweeping the country and really started impacting individuals, but also companies, small businesses in particular. And so we're bringing this program to you to give you a little bit of support, some education, some skills in connecting with your community, connecting within your business, making some really important human connections with each other, and overall really boosting resilience in all of us. So last week we kind of started the program. If you would like information on that video, you can contact the folks over there at Survive and Thrive or myself. I'll type in my email at the end of our webinar today. So we're headed into module 2 of our GRIT program here. Our goals today is we're going to do a quick review of module 1, just in case you weren't able to attend that one. And then we're going to talk about developing self-efficacy, learning about disaster and traumatic stress, COVID-19 specific stressors, and then we're going to jump into that first GRIT leadership step of making contact, asking questions. This is my absolute favorite module to teach. We talk about self-efficacy and resilience. And that's something that gets me really excited. So if you have any questions, this is the one to really jump into. So real briefly, module 1, we covered what was the purpose of GRIT coaching program and what does a coach do. So again, that purpose of a GRIT coach program and why we developed this was to really support each other during a stressful pandemic, something that most of us haven't experienced in our lifetime. And a pandemic that has not stopped, right? That we're, almost 6 months into this, and we're still feeling new challenges, new impacts of the pandemic, and having to adapt and overcome specific challenges. And then also knowing that you're going to learn a lot of education and skills, and you can really adapt those to any disaster yourself or your business, your organization might be experiencing. So typical disasters being natural disasters, but could also be things like severe company-wide stress or regional stress, things that are going on that are impacting your business in some way. We talked a little bit about what kind of leadership challenges you might be experiencing within the stress of COVID-19, such as having to adapt to a virtual environment or virtual workforce pretty quickly, how to support your employees if you are more in the essential business area, and then how to support your employees as you return back to work, if you have, and navigating what this kind of new normal looks like. And then we covered a couple of core principles of disaster support. So when we experience a disaster, whether natural or man-made, or again, this pandemic that we're experiencing now, what we really want to do is wrap support around each other by promoting calming, by promoting mood boosting or positive activities in each other, by spreading hope, which is that, that feeling that we can get through this, we can accomplish this together, instilling obviously that sense of safety, which is especially important with COVID-19, whether that looks like proper PPE, whether that looks like deciding who stays home and when, and some of those challenges, and then how to promote self-efficacy, which we're going to cover way more today. As we go into this, if you have any questions at any time, you can throw them into the chat box. I will address them whenever I can. If something resonates with you, if you just want to comment on something, absolutely throw that in. One of the reasons why we are doing this special webinar for Survive and Thrive is so that you guys can keep connected with each other. Share what your accomplishments have been, share what your challenges have been, and we'll talk about a little of those. But connect together. That's why we want to do this. So feel free to use that chat function at any time. Just try to address it to everyone versus all panelists. Sometimes Zoom kind of automates that. So definitely feel free to contribute and connect within the webinar today. All right, so developing self-efficacy. This is one of my favorite concepts. Self-efficacy is that feeling inside of us that says, I can do this, right? That we're faced with a challenge and some part of us says, I'm going to get through this challenge. I'm going to work through it. That's your self-efficacy inside you, right? But we don't just develop self-efficacy on day one. We do it by overcoming small challenges bit by bit and by getting encouragement from others. So my favorite way to describe this is marathoners, right? Marathoners, for the most part, unless you're extremely skilled, and good for you if you are, But marathoners, for the most part, don't wake up the first morning that they decide to run a marathon and run the 26.2 miles, right? They take very small steps to get to that point. So very first of all, they have to put their shoes on, right? And so there's a little bit of those, I have to make sure I have the material and the resources I need in order to accomplish this task, right? So if I want to run a marathon, the first thing I need is proper footwear, right? And I need to check in on the weather of the day. And I need to make sure that there's certain things that can allow me to accomplish my goal. Then that runner decides, okay, to start with, I'm going to run 1 mile. I'm going to see how that goes, right? And as you run a mile, you start to really think, okay, this isn't so bad, or hey, I'm paying attention. I've got this little pinch in my knee, right? We're just paying attention to what's happening in our body, what's happening in our mind. We run that mile and that felt wonderful, right? Hopefully. The next time you run, you might go to 2 miles or 3. And the point is you build up little by little by little until 26.2 feels really accomplishable. And for some people, the goal isn't 26.2, it's 3 miles. And that is just as powerful and wonderful, right? And then when you look at when you actually get to the day of the race, you're maybe starting to run and you've got all these people on the sidelines cheering you on, saying, you can do this, you've got this, you're crazy, but you're going to finish it, right? Holding these wonderful signs up. But you've got this encouragement from other people. And then as you're running, you're looking around you and there's all these people running with you. And you're thinking to yourself, man, if they can do it, if they can run these 3 miles, then I can run these 3 miles. So we use that modeling behavior. We look at what other people are doing and we apply that to ourselves that says, I can do this, right? And then finally, just as we did on day 1, we check in with ourselves internally as well. How am I feeling today? Right? Did I just, sprain my ankle 2 weekends ago? And so that's really twitching. And so maybe I'm not going to finish, I'm not going to run the whole 26.2. Maybe I have to dot in some walks there. I have to give myself some grace, some break here. Or you're running, you realize you've got a ton of anxiety because there's all these people all around you and that gets really overwhelming. And so checking in with that. Or say you're running and, a week ago, you just suffered a loss in the family. Someone passed away and that's really heavy on your heart. So there's all these factors that come into play on the day of the race to say, I can do this. And, or this might be a little bit harder for me, but I'm still going to do the best I can. And those little voices inside, that's our self-efficacy. That's what pushes us forward. So when we think about trauma-related self-efficacy and what does it mean to overcome traumatic situations, that self-efficacy focuses more on how we feel about our own ability to cope and come through the trauma. It helps us regulate our emotions during and following traumatic experiences. It helps us solve problems related to the disaster, to maintain relationships and social networks, and to fulfill trauma-related tasks. So an example we can use here is if you've ever been in a car accident, right? And so say you were driving and somebody, hit the front of your car. Having that's a traumatic experience, right? That is an event that's intensity level was high enough to be considered traumatic. And we'll talk about what those look like a little bit later. But having trauma-related self-efficacy helps you cue into your emotions during that event as well as following. So maybe during, you just had an impact, there's some panic rising, or there's some shock, or whatever that feeling is going. Trauma-related self-efficacy helps you not kind of fall apart in that moment if you can help it, right? Sometimes our bodies just do what our bodies need to do. And then following that traumatic experience, it helps us regulate our anxiety. It helps us regulate maybe some depression we might be feeling, some overwhelm, some stress. It helps us kind of work through some of those emotions. It then helps us solve problems, right? And so say I got, hit on impact and my car has to be towed. Trauma-related self-efficacy helps you walk through the process of calling your insurance, calling the tow truck, getting through to your accident, and then helps you maintain relationships, right? So do you call and reach out to a friend to come help you? Or do you, is some of that shock setting in and you need to go to a friend's house to kind of just be somewhere else for a little bit, right? To the car accident that we now have to figure out. Trauma-related self-efficacy gives us that ability to go step by step by step and get through that event. And then we have this wonderful thing called collective self-efficacy. And that's the group or community's belief in their ability to respond to a challenge or a stressor. So it's that perception that a community has what it takes to manage a major disaster. One of the most amazing and kind of still gives me chills examples of this collective self-efficacy is in the beginning of the pandemic when hospital workers and ER staff were really being hit really hard. Not to say that they aren't still, but really in those first couple of weeks, that's where a lot of attention is being spent on that care for our hospital workers, right? And at 7 o'clock at night, there were cities all around the world, chanting and singing and banging pots and pans together for our healthcare staff. That's an example of collective self-efficacy. That's the community saying, I stand with you, I hear you, I support you, I motivate you. This is, we can do this together. So a wonderful example of collective self-efficacy there, but you can see this in all tons of different examples, right? We saw small businesses coming together to support one another. We saw small businesses owners, going without a paycheck to pay their employees, right? There was all these little pieces, some of them big and loud, some of them just very quiet, getting coffee for people. That's that sense of collective self-efficacy that says, I stand here with you. We've got this together. I've got your back on this and we can get through this. So looking at that, this is where I really want you to send into the chat if you can. What have you sensed for collective efficacy in either your organization or even just in your community in the wake of COVID-19, and what was that like? So if you can send into the chat, answer this question, whether that relates to your own organization or business or community, or examples that you might have seen around. What are some examples you have? I know for my own organization, one of the things that our collective advocacy did, we unfortunately had to, we had to lay off, right? We had to let one of our employees go for a lot of different reasons. But one thing that our organization did, we're a therapy clinic, but we came together and we made a quilt for that employee to say, we honor your time here, we love you, we send you off with all of our positive thoughts and good grace. But it was a way of kind of coming together to support one individual in our community. So if you have any other examples, go ahead and throw them into the chat. The popping up of several websites that showed you which local restaurants deliver and a guide on how to support your local small businesses. That's a great example. And we've seen that kind of pop up over and over again. After the social unrest happened, there was a lot of businesses popping up that said, support Black-owned businesses, and this is how you can do that. That's another example of coming together. So absolutely, that was a great one. And local restaurants quickly adapting to be able to deliver, right? They might not have had that service before, but they had the collective efficacy to say, I don't want to just stop, right? I don't want to just not be in business right now because of my employees, because of my business structure, because of all these reasons. And so I'm going to quickly adapt to continue to serve and continue to be there for my employees and my community. Great example. Anybody else throwing in an example? All right, well, I'll go ahead and move forward. But if you do Survive and Thrive at its core is a community effort, absolutely perfect example right there was Survive and Thrive. This is a seriously wonderful organization, an initiative that really helps bring small businesses together. So that's absolutely a prime example of what collective efficacy can do. All right, so if you have any other examples, feel free to throw them out. I'll continue to say them out loud as I see them come in. So when we build on efficacy, whether that's self-efficacy, trauma-related, community, what have you, we're really building resilience. Resilience doesn't mean that we're never stressed out or that stress or trauma never impacts us, because as profoundly human beings, it will. It just is a matter of how we show it or when we show it. So resilience instead is more of an ability to kind of bounce back or return to this pre-trauma or pre-stress state a little bit easier, maybe a little bit quicker than somebody who doesn't have the same level of resilience. So it's that ability to bounce back from a hardship, a stressor, a step back, an obstacle. The more we do this, the more resilient we become for future hardships. So as stressful and heavy as COVID-19 has been on our community, it's also instilling a real heavy sense of resilience in all of us, right? Because we've had to figure it out. We've had to face a challenge, get through it, learn from it, bounce back. And for some people, that's taken a little bit of a different timeline than others. But overall, we're becoming more resilient individuals. And we're developing a more resilient community. So we have grit. We have a couple different levels of this grit program. The one we're going over right now is for leadership. We also have one just kind of at a community level, and we have one for education. And after the education one, I believe I had a mom email me and just say, I have seen this sense of resilience in my kid who's had to adapt from, he's a college student he was in the engineering program. And she said, I had to watch him go from, in-person classes to taking chemistry at home. And holy stressful was that. And she said, it was just amazing that I could see him work through this extreme stress and come out on top of it and really feel more resilient because of that challenge. So that's what we're building here when we overcome stressors like this. Resilience isn't the experience of adversity alone. It's rather the successful coping that's important in developing resilience. So when we're building that, it's utilizing resources effectively. It's flexible coping. I like to say that there's hundreds of coping skills out there. Sometimes we have to mix it up. Sometimes we have to use more than one. And so that's where that flexibility comes, right? That maybe for a while taking, maybe going to the park for an hour on the weekend was really a way for you to kind of cope with your week and let go of some of that stress. And with COVID-19, maybe that hasn't been possible for you for whatever reason, not comfortable going out of the house, or the parks are shut down, or whatever that looks like. And so you have to kind of adapt. What is that coping style? How is that coping style different now, where I can still get the relief and the calming effect that I enjoy, but not by going to the park anymore, right? So flexibility there. It's also actively managing personal distress. So that's your own feelings of anxiety, depression, stress, what have you. Ability to seek opportunities to help others. So that's a really powerful one. And again, one of the reasons why we created this grit program is because we can help ourselves all day and that feels wonderful. But there's something powerful about seeking opportunities to help other people out too. The more we help others, the more we boost our own feelings of resilience and good. And then we pair this ability to respond to the setbacks with those perceptions of self-efficacy that we talked about, as well as that feeling of positive self-worth, that I'm worth building through this. I'm worth going through this, right? So resilient people, you might not know who they are when you just look them on the street. It's the inside, right? So resilient people are effective at identifying what they can control. That's a big piece. And developing strategies to recognize and acknowledge success as they cope. One of the really frustrating, difficult parts of COVID-19 has been, again, that level of unknown and also a loss of control, right? And so for people who tend to be a little bit more type A or tend to really want to go after things, having a loss of control can be really hard to deal with. And so identifying what in my life can I control then, and how do I work with those challenges? Resilient people thrive on turning stressors into challenges rather than viewing them as difficulties or threats, right? So it's not necessarily a roadblock, it's just a barrier. How do I get around that barrier? Having confidence in your ability to manage what's coming at you. Good at self-care and work and take care of emotional and physical health. So we'll talk about this challenge a little bit more with leaders in small businesses, in which you kind of might lose this work-life balance, right? Especially in the middle of a pandemic and all of the stress going on. We're seeing a lot of people really throwing themselves at work to make sure that everything runs smoothly, to make sure that things are getting done, right? And you losing that home life balance, that self-care, that relaxing, all of those other pieces that come together. I was recently talking to some epidemiologists who have been working at minimum 15 hours a day since January, right? Because that's kind of what the field has been calling for them to do. But at 7 months in, now they're threadbare thin in working through some of that stress, right? So figuring out where's your self-care and your work balance and how do you maintain that amidst stress. Persevere, again, when you hit that roadblock and when you do fail, turn that into more of a learning opportunity in order to bounce back or to succeed again. Help others cope. Again, there's that powerfulness of helping others and seeking out ways to help others. And knowing that concept of collectively we succeed, alone we may not. So I'm going to show you these two quick videos about Amy Van Dyken. I absolutely love this story and I love sharing this one. So it'll talk about it a little bit, but Amy Van Dyken is a Olympic gold winning swimmer, right? And so In the 1990s, she won, I'm not sure if it was one Olympics or several, but she gained several gold medals. And she even got to the Olympics. Even getting there was a road for her. She overcame childhood asthma. She was told that, you're not going to be able to do some of these extreme sports. And then she went on to win the Olympics, right? Crazy. And then afterwards, after the Olympics, she was involved in an ATV accident and was extremely close to becoming completely paralyzed. And so this is her amazing story of resilience. You should be able to hear this, but for whatever reason, if you cannot, just throw that into the chat box real quick for me.
As a young girl, she struggled to walk up a flight of stairs without losing her breath. Her doctor told her parents swimming might help strengthen Amy's lungs. Amy Van Dyken went on to win 6 gold medals and become the first woman to accomplish such a feat. Now she has a new challenge, learning to live with a spinal cord injury. Photojournalist Chris Hansen joined me at Craig Hospital in Inglewood today, where we watched part of Amy's physical therapy. Everyone has an internal clock, an awareness of the time it takes us to do this or that.
Oh, this one's being sticky today.
Amy Van Dyken Ruin is an Olympian.
And then we go, right?
A gold medalist 6 times over.
Come on, Amy.
She has seen the difference of 1,000th of a second.
Ah, did it.
In 1996, her 50-meter freestyle swim took less than 25 seconds. Moving her body out of her chair and into a bed takes nearly 2 minutes.
Okay.
Amy
Got it.
is training again. She is learning how to move the body that once glided through water.
Nope. I always tried to power through everything. And even the 100 butterfly in 96, they were like, you're not good enough to swim this, because I would always muscle it. Well, for once, I used technique and I ended up winning a gold medal. Nope, I don't want help.
That 100-meter butterfly took just 59 seconds.
I got this.
The same time it takes to replace a shoe.
So, but that's why we go over it and over it and over it, so you remember. So it's like second nature.
She's had some time for acceptance.
Oh, but it's hard, when they pinprick you and you can't feel it, that's really hard. And it's kind of a realization that, yes, I am now paralyzed and I can't feel. All right.
She makes no time for what ifs.
Duck my head.
Just like swimming,
Leg.
this is an individual sport. She's pushing herself and enjoying it too.
You got to keep it light because there's a lot of seriousness, but you got to have fun with it, It's your new life. You got to have fun.
She chooses to find the joy in this, her second chance. She nearly died in that ATV crash a month ago. She traveled about 15 feet before going off an embankment.
We had dinner, and then I remember we stood up. That's where I go blank. Yep, that's it.
And she wasn't moving. And then I touched her, and she still wasn't moving. And so then had to start thinking, like, okay, she's not breathing.
I felt really enclosed, and it was almost like a tunnel, but it was like green, but it was really lit up. And I remember not being afraid of anything. And, Dr. Toomey Allen was like, you guys need to say goodbye. You're less than a millimeter from your aorta. If I move wrong, you could bleed out and die.
Time was on her side again, which is why she views her time here
we go.
as the next challenge.
I would love to walk out of the doors of Craig Hospital. Did it. I would love to. Now, will I? Don't know. Is it possible? Sure. Is it likely? Maybe, maybe not.
Amy is a competitor. She's strong and determined. And she's also optimistic and bubbly.
But what's cool for me, Kim, is that everyone saw the competitive side of me during the Olympic years, right? Good, bad, and indifferent, whatever it was. But that was just one side of me. But that seemed like that was all everyone saw. You never got to see this side of me. So I'm so glad that people get to see the competitive side of me, but the real me. Oh, that was the best one.
The woman behind the gold medals is training again, training to redefine what she considers a victory.
And every day it's a celebration because I am here and I made it through another night.
She is just incredible. So I'm going to show one more video of a little bit more recent interview with Amy.
in here.
Slowly lower down.
Yes, these people are my people. They are my tribe. I can count on them. The training has been gnarly, but it's been really fun being with everybody. Everybody cheers everybody on, so it makes it great.
But she brings it to the gym every single day. So when we started training, we weren't necessarily having the wheel wad games, which she's training for specifically right now, on our mind. We just wanted to see if she could do CrossFit again.
So the event that I'm going to is called the Wheel Wad Games, and it is for differently abled athletes. So we've got seated men and women, standing upper extremity, standing lower extremity. We've got small stature, and I believe we have visually impaired. This is the CrossFit Games for differently abled athletes.
Once I could evaluate her and say, hey, this girl's got something else, we quickly said, let's go for it in the open, see what happens. She was one of the top 12 fittest para CrossFit athletes in the world.
By the way, I'm Amy. I should probably introduce you. Nick, so good to meet you. Nick, I'm kind of a hot mess, so bless your heart. What we're doing is we're going to see who the fittest differently abled athlete in the world is. So fingers crossed.
With her drive and determination, we should finish on top.
All right, so that video was taken last year, 2019. Amy went on to get second in the wheel wad games, just a few points behind the woman who won the entire thing. So an incredible story of resilience, an incredible story of coming up on top. All right, so kind of going back a little bit, we talked about resilience and what self-efficacy is and getting through stressors and challenges. We're gonna spend a little bit of time talking about what are stressors. So stressors are any event or condition that cause a person to adapt or change in any significant way. They have many sources and include situations that require significant change or adaptations. Humans are wonderfully unique and challenging because we can have a stress response. That's what our body does when we experience a stress. That's the stress response. We can have that to both a perceived, a real life right there in front of us challenge or threat. And we can also have that exact same stress response for a perceived or imagined threat as well. So for an example, we'll go through this in a second, but the classic example of stress and threat is walking in the forest and coming along and seeing a bear. And what do you do when you see the bear, right? Your body's going to react in a very automatic, for the most part, you don't get to choose response, right? We can also have that exact same stress response where our body gets into a very heightened state. We can have that same response for a threatened stress. So say that you're walking along a forest and you start to think, the ranger that I talked to before I started my hike this morning mentioned that there's been bears in the area. I wonder if I'm going to see a bear. And as you're walking around, you start to think, oh, I just heard a sound behind me. Is that a bear, right? And we start to get a little bit hypervigilant. We start to get a little stressed out. We start to think, what am I going to do if I see a bear? And then our body goes into the stress response. So knowing that we can have, again, this response to a real threat and to an imagined threat as well. So that stress reaction, that stress response, is the mind and body's reaction to that unusual demand, such as a threat or a challenge. Whether this demand is real or imagined, outside the body or within, our body is going to automatically go into a fight, flight, or freeze response. So when we come along and see a bear, again, real or imagined, our body's going to automatically do one of three things, right? Automatically, it's going to want to get big and yell and try to metaphorically fight the bear, right? Unless you're like really macho and then you really go fight the bear. Kudos to you. But for the most part, we're going to try to get big and yell, right? I'm going to fight the bear. We might also get the heck out of Dodge, right? And run away from the perceived bear, from the bear, right? That I don't want anything to do with this bear. If I move slowly or if I move quickly, he won't see me. I'm just going to get away. Or our body decides to kind of shut down instead, right? I'm going to pretend I can't see the bear can't see me. If I just stand still, nothing's going to happen. And we kind of freeze instead. But no matter what, until we are trained otherwise, our body is going to go into one of these three responses automatically. Now we look at people like first responders, military, ER doctors, some of those other kind of higher stress occupations. And for the most part, they're taught to fight the bear every time. right? That they're taught to go towards the danger instead of go away. But that takes a lot of training for them to get to that point. Any other time, your body's going to automatically go into a different response. So I, for one, am a freezer. Hate it, but that's what I do. If I come across a threat or a challenge, I drop to the ground. Wish I didn't. That's what my body decides to do anyway, until I can train it to do something else. So we'll watch one more video. This is Robert Sapolsky. He's an American endocrinologist, and he has just a really wonderful way of talking about this stress response.
Back to a term I guarantee you had in 9th grade biology. With any luck, you have not thought about this word since then. Do you remember homeostasis? Homeostasis, having an ideal body temperature, an ideal level of glucose in the bloodstream, having an ideal everything, being in homeostatic balance. A stressor is anything in the outside world that knocks you out of homeostatic balance. You're some zebra and a lion has leapt out and ripped your stomach open and your innards are dragging in the dust and you still need to get out of there. This counts as being out of homeostatic balance. Or you're that lion who's half starved to death, and if you don't manage to chase something down to eat, you're not going to survive the night, a short-term physical crisis. And the stress response is what you do with your body. You secrete adrenaline and 11 other hormones I won't torture you with. The stress response reestablishes homeostatic balance. That's all you need to know about the subject if you're a zebra or a lion. If you're human, though, you've got to expand the definition in a very critical way, which is, among us, some of the time we turn on the stress response because we've had a challenge to homeostatic balance, all of that sort of thing. But some of the time we turn on the stress response because we think we're just about to be stressed. And if it turns out that you're right, hooray for you. You know, here comes the elephant. You don't have to wait to be stomped by it before increasing your blood pressure. You can have an anticipatory stress response, which is great. On the other hand, if you think that way all the time and you're constantly assuming that there are stressors coming that do not really exist, we have technical terms for you. You're being neurotic as hell. You're being anxious. You're being paranoid. You're being hostile. You are being profoundly human. Sit down a hippo and try to describe what the prime lending rate is, and it's going to have no idea what you're talking about. But we do, and that's the central concept in the whole field. We cognitively, socially sophisticated primates turn on the exact same stress response as does that zebra running for its life or a lion running for a meal, and we turn it on for purely psychological reasons. We turn it on with memories, with emotions, with thoughts, and the whole punchline is that's not what it evolved for. What stress is like for 99% of the beasts on this planet is 3 minutes of screaming terror in the savannah, after which it's either over with or you're over with. And what do? We turn on the identical stress response for 30-year mortgages. And that's where you begin to get the wear and tear in the system.
I just really love how he phrases so many of those things, especially the part about being profoundly human. I think we tend to really get on ourselves for being anxious or depressed or agitated or any of those other feelings we might have. But the reality is that's what makes us human. That's part of the game for us, right? Is that we're all going to experience these emotions at some point in our life. We're all going to experience symptoms of post-traumatic stress at some point in our life because we are exposed to trauma and stress on a basis that we've never been before, right? That we are experiencing things that the normal human experience does not get to have. And so having the understanding that this is just what makes us profoundly human, I love that message. Natasha shared Robert Sapolsky's book, is Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. It's a wonderful book talking about the stress response, why we develop the stress response, why animals don't have the same stress response, but it's a really great book. So if you're interested in, Natasha shared the Amazon link for that. All right, so we talk a little bit about chronic stress as well. So again, we can have the stress response perceived or imagined. And as Robert Sapolsky said, some of that stress comes from things like mortgages, work schedules, managing employees, all of these kind of challenges that turn on this stress response in us. When we're exposed to these kinds of stressors or threats on a more regular basis, we can really start to develop chronic stress, or those physical effects that can cause and really worsen a range of health problems. So stress, we know, impacts us cognitively, emotionally, behaviorally. When we think about just there in that moment stress, we might start to really get hard on us. We might start to have a lot of self-doubt. There's that cognitive piece. Again, we might have feelings of anxiety, agitation, some of those emotional pieces. Behaviorally, we might lash out at other people. We might shut down. We might isolate. There's all of these pieces that come together in our own unique stress response. When that stress is chronic, all of those problems can really start to prolong as well. Right? Cognitive challenges can start to look like a lot of forgetfulness, a lot of inability to manage multiple things at one time. Again, that feeling of I can't get through my day, or I can't answer simple questions. One of my greatest examples of what this kind of cognitive stress can look like is if you've ever interacted with somebody who's going through a lot of chronic stress, or who has just experienced a pretty traumatic situation, and you go up to them and says, you say, what can I do for you? And the answer typically is, I don't know. And you can even ask simpler questions like, can I get you a water? And the answer is, I don't know. Right? Because cognitively, there's so much going on that there's no room for those little answers, right? And so that's a piece that really kind of goes to the wayside when we're experiencing chronic stress as well. Emotionally, this is where we start to experience some of those more prolonged mental health conditions, such as generalized anxiety or major depression or post-traumatic stress disorder, some of those more kind of more prolonging disorders. And again, I want to really stress that just because we experience some of those emotions, some of those feelings, doesn't mean that it will turn into a disorder. It just makes us profoundly human beings. Where we want to really pay attention is, do those emotions and feelings start interfering with our ability to really live our life, right? Is the anxiety to the point where I'm not sleeping anymore? Or is the agitation to the point where I'm really ruining relationships? That's when we really want to start to seek help in those situations. And then again, behaviorally, we can start to really isolate. We can start to, again, break down social relationships. There's just a lot of behaviors that can then really worsen with chronic stress as well. Disaster and traumatic stress is a little bit different, right? So as I said a little bit before, some stressful events are considered traumatic in intensity level. They're typically events that threaten the life, health, or safety of an individual, whether that's directly or indirectly. And then the distress and symptoms that follow such exposure tend to be more severe or persistent than general stress reactions. We can have kind of the more known trauma experiences, such as, again, the car accident, military, of course, with war, with exposure to death and dying. That's really where we pay a lot of attention to our hospital workers right now, is that exposure to death and dying. So those are all events that threaten our life. There can also be events that threaten just our ability to adapt, or our ability to enjoy daily enjoyment, right? And so those are things like divorce, or kids moving away, or kids coming back home after college. Some of those little stressors as well can lead to a more heavy stress reaction. The coronavirus, COVID-19, also presents some particular challenges. So while traumatic stress and conventional disasters produce certain symptoms, coronavirus can do the same thing, such as that threat to the safety and well-being of ourselves and our loved ones, and the loss of community, the loss of access to normal activities of daily life. So if we think about, for example, in Colorado, let's use the example of a tornado coming through, right? We might have a small sense that the tornado's coming, usually not a whole lot, because that's the nature of tornadoes, but we might kind of get a sense that danger could be happening. We might get concerned about the safety of ourselves and other people, right? Where am I located right now? Can I get to shelter? Where are my loved ones? Can they get to shelter? We just think about, where's the safety level? If a tornado does come through and hits part of the town or the whole town, then there's that feeling of loss of community as well, right? Where do I go to rebuild? Who do I connect with right now? My town hall's gone. Where do I go? Things like that. So that loss of community. Loss of access to normal activities in daily life, right? So if a tornado has come and hit our own house, now we've lost all of these different pieces of our normal life. Or again, it's just hit other parts of our town. I don't know where to send my kid for school. There's all these little pieces that come together after a disaster, right? And we can kind of predict the trajectory of a disaster. Unlike those, the pandemic creates more of a sense of ongoing threat that's affecting everybody. So I think most people 5 months ago in March, when this thing really started to hit us, wouldn't have expected that in July, we're still experiencing the significant stress of the pandemic and still overcoming brand new challenges with the pandemic. So it's an ongoing threat. We're now looking at what is this going to look like 6 months to a year from now, and are we still going to be experiencing stress and threat from it? It also has that over-looming unknown factor that we're dealing with as well, and that creates a lot of that perceived threat as well. So again, there's that unfamiliar, invisible nature of the virus, makes it more difficult to cope with. We don't know, exactly who it's impacting for the most part. We don't know when it's going to hit our own community hard. We don't know what the government is going to decide to do. So there's all of this unknown, unfamiliar things. There's frightening information that's received in doses and can sometimes be fragmented or contradictory. I think this was especially true in the beginning, and I think it's still happening now. But where, every news station is almost reporting a completely different story or a completely different information. And so that has a lot of threat on us as well. I know one of my, I'm a therapist, right? One of my clients, our whole goal was to stop watching the news so much because it was weighing on him so much. And so knowing that just absorbing the news can really lead to a lot of heaviness and a lot of stress. And then there's the worry about different things that we wouldn't necessarily worry about in natural disasters. Things like our economy, our employment rates, our housing, some of those pieces as well. And then there's these more specific experiences that can be especially stressful for those who are experiencing them. So there's obviously the threat of becoming infected and ill, and having that threat even more heightened for people like in the healthcare industry, or even our grocery workers, people who are being exposed more often than other people. For those in specific high-risk situations, people who are immunocompromised, people who have the threat of infecting loved ones, who have kind of those more high-risk concerns going on. There's the cascade of losses. And I think now that we're in our 5th month, we're really experiencing that cascade as well. So in the beginning, there was a ton of layoffs as people were adjusting to budget cuts and financial needs. And then there was, housing crisis. And then there was all these other kind of losses coming in that are all related one way or another to the COVID-19. Again, there's that threat of family members infected. For some people, it's enough to be completely cut off from society. Right? That I'm so afraid of myself getting sick, or I'm so afraid of my loved one getting sick that I'm not leaving the house for months. Right? And we've seen some of those people who have barely left their house in 5 months because of the threat of COVID. There's the loss of loved ones and friends as the death rates continue to go up. There's that fear as well. There's people who have lost multiple family members to COVID-19. Even if it's not multiple, one loss to COVID-19 is hard enough, right? And so thinking about that kind of heaviness in the morning as well. And then there's the cultural experience. And then those actions need to stay safe, that what we've called social distancing increases our stress by reducing our access to normal routines, enjoyable activities, and social supports. I think we've tried really hard to overcome some of those specific challenges. There's still meetings being done virtually. There's clubs being done virtually. There's still people interacting socially, but there's kind of a looming threat that comes along with all of those activities. And then going into what essential workers specifically might be experiencing. So I know we've got kind of a variety of small businesses here, so this may or may not apply to you, but it's still something to keep in the back of your mind within your own community. If you have essential workers in your own community, or in your family, or in your organization as a whole, that some of the stress they might be experiencing include that physical and mental exhaustion. So there's a concept of cognitive overload, that I've been thinking and experiencing and managing and deciding so much that my brain's exhausted. A torment of making difficult decisions about who's going to receive care, and the pain of losing patients and colleagues as happened. Then there's the possible infection risk of catching a disease with potentially lethal outcome, or that perceived life threat. There's separation from family and the need to social distance from them. So I know if people know, there's some people who, if they've been exposed or if they could potentially have been exposed, they might quarantine within their own home, right, for 2 weeks. And so I know my own family, there's part of my family who's quarantining in the upstairs while the rest of their family lives downstairs. And so there's a lot of that separation going on as well. Anxiety about passing the infection on to other families, that's what might be leading to some of that separation. Limited access to PPE and needed supplies. I know this was especially true in the beginning. It's a little bit better now, but there's still some of that threat happening. And then if someone does become infected, that sudden role reversal from I'm a caregiver to I'm a patient that needs care. And that can lead to a lot of complicated emotions as well. It can lead to frustration, helplessness, just some of those other complicated feelings. So that's kind of our wrap up of resilience, self-efficacy, and stress. I want to check if there's any questions. Go ahead and throw them into the chat box now. I know we're kind of nearing the end of our hour, so I want to make sure that I have time to address any questions if you do have any. And then I'll also share my email and our website if you've got more later. So jumping back into what are our 5 steps of grit. These are our steps of making some of those human connections with each other, reaching out, sharing support, sharing resources, helping each other kind of boost what our strengths and resilience are. So those 5 steps are, how do we make connection to begin with? How do we ask good questions, not just, questions to ask questions for the sake of it, but how do we ask good questions that are going to obtain, good responses? How to identify coping strengths and resilience. So as you're having these conversations with one another, how do you kind of pick up on what are they doing well, or what do they need areas of improvement on? And then how do you add to those strengths? And then talking about reviewing, summarizing, and discussing those action steps and giving resources. So we're going to cover the kind of the good questions in another module. We just don't have time to fit it into this hour. But I'll explain, give you a lot of different examples of kind of what good questions are that you can ask people that help pull some of this information out. So you have not missed it, Lauren. We're going to get there later. So just briefly, because I know we're about the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about that making connection. And then if you join us in the Thursday webinar, we'll encompass this a little bit more. We have one more question from Natasha. Especially in the context of leadership, how do we balance developing self-efficacy and building collective efficacy within a team? So Natasha, can you say a little bit more about what you're thinking there?
Yeah, of course. I guess what I'm thinking too is, like, I understand kind of the relationship and that one leads into another. I guess it's just in a matter of, especially in this kind of crisis, and as you're trying to take care and make sure that you're building it within a team, I feel like that's an added stress on a leader. So how do you kind of balance it, or kind of how do you, I guess, integrate them, or what are some tools there between developing your own self-efficacy, but then also really trying to curate a work environment right now that also supports your team?
Yeah, that makes sense. So we're going to talk about, I have some kind of challenges and ways to overcome some of those challenges in another module. I think it's Thursday's module that they're all in there. But I think it's a little bit of having a balance and boundary, and that's not easy. It's going to be unique to everybody. But showing so it's kind of leading by example, right? That I can show my self-efficacy in my team by doing the work myself as well. If that makes any sense, kind of. So if I want my team to be taking care of themselves, I have to show that I'm taking care of myself as well, right? That if I want to show that it's okay to take a day where you kind of regroup or take some time out for yourself, I need to be able to be doing that for myself as well. And so not throwing yourself wholeheartedly into just the organization, right? Taking that time out to really allow yourself to work on calming and relaxing and some of those other good steps as well yourself. So maybe that looks like that's what you're doing on the weekends, and you have that little work-life balance on the weekends. Maybe that just looks like, at 5 o'clock, that's when I'm going to stop my emails and I'm going to kind of allow myself to recover and work through my own stuff. So I don't know if that answers the question fully, but it's definitely leading by example. And then we'll talk about different ways that you can promote some of the team self-efficacy in the meantime.
I think that's great. And I think that also circles back to the kind of point of making connection. So it's sharing the experience, sharing what you do. And I think that's great. Thank you so much.
Yep, absolutely. And like I said, we'll go over a little bit more in detail later. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and stop our presentation for now. So I'm just going to get to our last slide. So if you have any other questions, go ahead and throw them in there right now. We'll cover a lot more in the next couple of modules. That's why we've broken this down, is because there's just so much to cover. Michael says, lots of new studies around DNA that identify that many human characteristics are much more nature programmed into our DNA than nurture. Where do you think grit fits into this? Are leaders generally self-selected because of their natural grit? That's a great question. So what you're talking about is, I just blanked on the name of it, epigenetics. So it's called epigenetics, where we're learning that there's a lot of traits, including trauma and trauma responses, that get passed down through our DNA. And so that argument of is it nature versus nurture is helping kind of pave the way for that. I still believe it's both, that we are born with certain traits, or we are born with certain challenges, and then nature kind of helps us overcome or reinforces those. But I do think leaders kind of come out of the woodwork because they're natural leaders, they're natural people who reach out and want to lead a team. That's kind of what grit is also built for as well, is how do we support people who already have the ability to make these connections? How do we just give you more skills and more resources in order to do that, right? And so grit is really for anybody, but that's why we developed this one a little bit more specifically to leaders, because there might be that kind of natural pull to want to support others, to want to lead a team or a community. So giving you a couple extra skills for that. So I think that's how this fits into grit, is that you most likely, just by being in Survive and Thrive, right, that you're already somebody who wants to be a leader, who might, it's not easy to have a small business and to be leading that. And especially with the challenges going on, to say this is still something I want to do and that I'm very passionate about, right? It takes somebody that's very passionate to say, I want to have my own business and I want to be an entrepreneur. And so having some extra skills and being able to make some of those human connections with your employees or with your community, that's where grit fits right in. I don't know, Michael, hopefully that answered your question. That nature versus nurture and epigenetics is very fascinating. We're still learning a lot about that field.
Yeah, no, that did answer my question. And yes, epigenetics is a really interesting new topic that you could debate for hours, for sure.
Oh, absolutely. I also teach a trauma class where we'll cover it in the, I'll talk a little bit about it in trauma class as well, because there's this very fascinating phenomenon that we pass on trauma through our genes. And we look a lot like Holocaust survivors, for instance, pass that level of trauma down into their offspring. So very, very interesting field. So we have just a few more minutes if anybody else has more questions. Again, this is why we're doing this as a webinar, so you can kind of connect together. If you can think, especially for your own organization or your business, how do some of these concepts apply? Or just kind of what's running around in your brain as you think about some of these concepts. All right, so I'm going to share my email here. If you have any questions, if you want to bounce anything around, we're going to go into some role plays in the next couple of webinars. If you ever want to practice that or just kind of talk to somebody through those steps, you can always contact me. That's what I'm here for. And then we've got a ton of more resources that are available to you. You can also sign up to be like a full-on grit coach, which just means we can give you more resources. There's a workbook attached. There's a couple of other things we can get you. You can sign up here. It's completely free. You'll get access to all 5 of the trainings that we've already, all 5 of the modules of the trainings we've already done. And then again, I can get you some more resources as well. If you sign up to be a grit coach, www.grit.uccs.edu, you can sign up for the one that's specific to leaders in small businesses. There's a little option that says which training. You can just go down to that one. So happy to send you all of that. If you have any questions, if you'd like to sign up, if you'd like to get more resources, I'll show you a little bit more what's on grit in another module. But that's what we're here for, is just to share resources and make human connections with each other. All right, thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you, Nicole, for speaking. We really appreciate you doing the second module, and the next 3 modules will be again this Thursday, Tuesday and Thursday again. My goal is to upload these as fast as I can. Hopefully my Wi-Fi and internet allows me to do so, but these webinars will all be on XI's webinar page. So if you miss them, you'll be able to find them there. Or if you missed any part, like Lauren, you'll be able to find them there. So have a good day, everyone. And Lauren, thank you again so much. See you this Thursday. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Nicole.